nice guy. And I said, well, where's the best ribs for me? Anyway, so we had the ribs. I had the beer. I knocked down 2 buds. I destroyed my lipids for the probably for the year. Never felt so good in my life. It made up for the descent over Memphis. And I said, well, now look, before we leave Memphis, is there anything else I should see? He said, well, do you want to see the motel where Martin Luther King Jr. was shot? And like a bell went off in my head. I mean, I got chills up and down my spine because I had forgotten that Martin Luther King Jr. had been executed in this city of Memphis, Tennessee. And so he drove us there. And I got to tell you, a certain something came over us, as we stood in front of that motel. A certain something came over us because I got to tell you that America changed the day Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. Now, you can go to michaelsavage.com. I'm not trying to pump a website. And there's a picture of yours truly standing right in front of that motel where MLK Jr. was shot. They left the 2 cars there, the Cadillac and the Dodge, right underneath that balcony where he was executed. And it was quite chilling. I mean, they built a civil rights museum and all. And I started to reflect on what's happened to America since Martin Luther King Jr. was executed, and how, although he was a man who was not greedy in any way, and I would have to think he really cared about his people, I think about the horrible people who've cashed in on the civil rights movement since him. I think of people like Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, but most importantly, I think about the sad state of America today, where we have a man, Barack Obama, who is as cynical as they come, who would not be president had it not been for the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. And I'll explain why I say that in great detail. And I went back to one of my slogans from 10 years ago, how sadly in America we have gone from I have a dream to I have a scheme. Yes, how we have gone from I have a dream to I have a scheme. Because Martin Luther King Jr., despite his flaws, and boy, are we all flawed. No man is perfect. Boy, are we flawed. I've heard everything about him, but nevertheless, I also heard this man speak live. 1967, 68, UN Plaza. I was a young high school teacher in New York City. I happened to be outside for lunch with a sandwich, and I heard him speak. I mean, there's a huge crowd. I've never been moved like that ever since. That speech was the greatest. I never heard a voice like that. Let me put it to you that way. That man had the ability to move mountains. He was definitely chosen for great things on this planet. And I thought about that. I thought about what I witnessed that day that Martin Luther King Jr. spoke in this country, how it moved me as a young kid, a young teacher with his first job in New York City. I thought about the hatred that I saw in the streets that day, the raging hatred, pure, unadulterated, racist hatred that I had never seen anything like in my life, simply because he was speaking. I thought about it. I just looked back upon it. And then I thought about another man with a great voice who came along, a false prophet by the name of Barack Obama, who has, instead of helping to lift up his people, has pushed his own people back down further than they've ever been in this country. You see, you don't understand what I'm trying to say to you. You think that Obama and Holder are out to help the African American. At least that's what they seem to say, but they're not in my estimation. I think that, I'm sorry to tell you, that Obama and Holder are willing to shaft the huge population of American Africans by flooding America with armies of Central Americans and Mexicans, by displacing the poor African American population in this country with an army, a tsunami of Central American and Mexicans. Who do you think will be most hurt economically by this human tsunami that Obama is using in this country right now? And now, look, I realize that you want me to stick to only the news stories, but you also know that if you're listening to my show, you're going to get a broader view of the news from a personal point of view. And I'm telling you, it was fate that put our plane down in Memphis. For reasons I think I understand, as I explained to you just now, but also for reasons I don't understand. It couldn't have been just to enjoy the ribs. You're not hearing the same things you heard from Martin Luther King Jr. about people of all races getting along and living together. You're hearing about the supremacy of a certain race over others. You're hearing about the fact that you have poverty in this country, that's overwhelming in certain communities, and yet he's bringing in millions of impoverished people from Central and South of Central America, Mexico. They're not all working here. You don't have 2 or 3-year-olds working, do you? How could you stupid liberals, and I call you stupid liberals, how could you idiots take the bait like guppies in a tank to believe that he wants to bring in illegal aliens because they'll do the jobs no American will do, when you see with your own eyes that many or most of this flood, this tsunami that he's bringing in now, illegally, by the way, are not workers. They're children, little girls and little boys, 3 years old to 8 years old. Mixed in with them are hardcore gang members, which is a second story that I don't want to get into. Who is going to take care of these children, many of whom are infected with diseases that were once eradicated in this country? Who will pay for their medical care, their housing? Who will educate them with all of the expensive English as a second language? Who's going to pay for it? Well, your answer is quite clear. You will. You, the liberal moron, and I, the conservative genius, will pay for it. But I will tell you who's going to be hurt the most: the poor. And so that woman in Memphis that I told you about, who sat outside the Lorraine Motel all these years with her flyer, had a flyer that said $27 million to renovate the Civil Rights Museum. Meanwhile, with nearly 1 in 5 residents stuck below the poverty line, metropolitan Memphis ranks as by far the most impoverished large metro area in the nation, close quote. And she said that money shouldn't be going to renovate a museum. She said it should be going to the poor, to help them. Now, if you have a finite resource base, finite amount of resources, how can you bring in millions of poor people and not hurt the millions of poor that already exist here? How? So you have to answer your own question and come to the conclusion that he's not bringing them in to help anyone here, that Obama's bringing them in for other reasons. They're not workers. He's not bringing in workers. That doofus, Biden, gives a speech before the National Association of Manufacturers and says that we need more and more and more an influx of illegal alien, whatever he calls them, immigrants. More and more and more, he says we need. More and more and more is what he says we need. What, he's getting child labor? I got to tell you something. Look, I didn't plan on landing in Memphis, and I did. We had to land. I didn't plan on going to the Elvis Museum. And that, by the way, that's the other side of the coin. That's the other side of the coin. The poor white that goes to the Elvis Museum, the sheeple, the white who doesn't know where he is in the world, walking around buying a hot dog, a trinket. I couldn't believe it. I thought I was on a drug. I thought someone slipped me something in the van. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I never saw anything like it in my life. It was just something astonishing. Okay, but God, you like the Elvis thing, but look in the same city. Look in the same city. You have an icon of a certain segment of the white population, Elvis Presley, and you have an icon of the civil rights movement, and you can't just say of the black population because there are many others who were affected by Martin Luther King Jr. I think you'd be a fool not to say we were all not affected by Martin Luther King Jr. You'd be an ignoramus not to understand that. In the same city, I said, there's something here for me. I haven't yet digested it because it was only yesterday. It was only yesterday in my life. It takes me sometimes days, months, weeks to absorb why fate or God puts me in certain situations or places. You know, as William Blake wrote, you must live your life forward, but you can only understand it backward, which is exactly what I'm trying to say to you. I mean, you have to live it forward. You have to try to sort out what's going on. But truthfully, you don't really understand what's going on until you get further away from it. You have to live your life forward, but you can only understand it backward. Well, I'm not far enough from yesterday to understand what it means today, but all I can tell you is I was extremely moved emotionally I was moved by that Lorraine Motel. I can't even explain why. I mean, maybe it was a part of my life that died when he was shot. I don't know. Certainly true. Certainly America's never recovered from his execution. It's never recovered from the execution of John F. Kennedy Jr., never recovered from the execution of RFK Jr., and it's never going to recover from the gangsters that have taken over this country. Never. It can never recover from this gang. It can't recover. And why do I say that? Because throughout time there's always been evil men, power-mad people who have been constrained by the U.S. Constitution in the case of this nation, and by a vigorous opposition party, and by a vigorous press, the Fourth Estate. But as I told you before, the Fourth Estate long ago became the fifth column for communism in this country. Write it down because it's probably the best thing I've ever said. The fourth estate became the fifth column for communism/socialism in this country a long time ago, which is why all we have are clowns, stone clowns on television.